He is implicitly advocating for anarchy. We're now going to cover Daniel Penny's arrest for the death of Jordan Neely. If that is something you do not want to hear, you have been warned, and so we'll get into it shortly. So nearly 2 weeks after Daniel Penny used a fatal chokehold to restrain a man on the floor of a New York City subway car, 24-year-old has been arrested and charged with killing Jordan Neely. He was charged with second-degree manslaughter. Under New York law, secondary manslaughter is defined as, quote, under our law, a person is guilty of manslaughter in the second degree when that person recklessly causes the death of another person. The following terms used in that definition has a special meaning. A person acts recklessly with respect to a death when that person engages in conduct which creates or contributes to a substantial and unjustified risk that another person's death will occur, and when he or she is aware of and consciously disregards that risk, and when that risk is of such nature and degree that disregard of it constitutes a gross deviation from the standard of conduct that a reasonable person would observe in that situation. The maximum sentence for this crime is 15 years in prison. Now, reasonable person is going to mean different things for different things, different people now, right? So that's why I don't like the reasonable person standard. I think it needs to be altered a bit, but that is where we are, legally speaking. So what happened? Well, we have different conflicting witnesses' reports, which is why I think these kind of things should always go to trial. So first up, a witness told NBC News that prior to the fatal chokehold, Neely had been screaming and saying how hungry and thirsty he was on board the train prior to the takedown, but had not physically attacked anyone. Another witness told the New York Post, quote, he said, "I don't care. I'll take a bullet. I'll go to jail." Because he would kill people on the train, he said. "I would kill a mother. Oh no! I don't care. I'll take a bullet. I'll go to jail." This gentleman, Mr. Penny, did not stand up, did not engage with the gentleman. He said not a word. It was all Mr. Neely that was threatening the passengers if he did not get what he wants. End quote. That is a witness to the New York Post. Now, during Penny's arraignment, Assistant District Attorney Joshua Steinglass told the judge that several witnesses observed Neely making threats, that Penny held Neely for several minutes, and at some point, Neely stopped moving. But Penny, after he stopped moving, continued to hold him for a period of time. In the days leading up to the charges, numerous protests across the city, including subway stations, took place to demand justice for Jordan Neely. We'll go over to some of those protest videos now to give you some idea of what happened. So we got this video. Man, these are so loud. Oh, that's why. There we go. We have a sit-in here. All right. We'll go over to the next video here. So here's another video of a protest. We're not going to watch the whole thing, so just to give you some idea of what happened.
Was asking for water. Everybody ignored him. Everyone ignored him. Just like you are ignoring me on this microphone. What shame. What shame. So as you continue to walk, but recognize that this revolution will continue. You do not just ignore it. Black people will never just be ignored in this country. You've ignored us for too long. Y'all ignored Jordan Neely screaming for help. Y'all ignored black people screaming for help. They have been pushed out of their homes. They have now been pushed into the shelters. They are pushed out into the train stations. They have nowhere else to go. They have nowhere else to go. They are even...
All right, so that is part of the protest there. And then we're going to go on to a subway protest now. We're going to let that video play a bit, just to give an idea of kind of what's going on here. It's kind of important. We'll go ahead and play it at 1.25 speed, just to get more info about it. So there are people on the track stopping trains. They're saying no justice, no peace. I'll get to your comment in a second there, I see Ian about it. Just get this. All right, so they're stopping trains. They're doing what is considered to be part of direct action in order to bring attention, in my opinion, deserved attention to the fact that at the time these protests were happening, Daniel Penny had not yet been arrested for the killing of Jordan Neely. To answer your question, because I want to be completely fair and honest, so was he peacefully asking people for water, or was he being aggressive? Everybody's going to have a different threshold of what is considered and not considered aggressive. I want to acknowledge that. To me, he was being aggressive. He was making threats. He was yelling. But at the same time, to me, that does not rise to the level to inflict violence upon him. To me, inflicting violence upon a person is only justified when violence is being enacted, or there is a very high likelihood of violence being enacted. Let me explain. So there's a difference between I'm going to kill somebody and a person with a gun waving it around saying I'm going to kill somebody. One has an actual possibility of happening. The other one, not so much. It's actually kind of hard to kill people with your bare hands. So that's what's going on there. To continue on, what we saw here, again, is protests erupting because a man who caused the death of another man had not been charged with that killing. In my opinion, and this is not based on legal opinion, this is based on my moral framework, if you cause the death of another person, you should be charged with that death. Even if it's self-defense, even if it's mostly clear to everybody that watches it, it's self-defense. And the reason I say that is because not everybody has the same level of what is and is not self-defense. And you need to have the court system that is set up to be adversarial, to suss out the truth through argument, through debate about what is and is not right and wrong in that specific instance. So we've seen numerous cases where somebody's like, hey, it was self-defense. And then as the trial progresses, you see more evidence comes out that you see that it's not self-defense. For example, the McMichaels killing. The McMichaels chased down a person they thought was engaged in crime. That person decided to defend himself against them because they were chasing him down. And then they killed him. They killed him because he reached for their gun in a fight for his own life. The police and prosecutor at the time believed the McMichaels. During trial, and this is something that I assumed was happening because of video evidence, so not really an assumption, they had the video evidence, it got public. But when that went public, it turned out the McMichaels didn't actually know it was him. They chased him down. They bumped him with their car. They tried to drive around him to cut him off at the pass while people in the back held guns and were trying to detain him. Why would you assume that they were just trying to do a citizen's arrest? How is that not self-defense for him? The McMichaels rightly got charged with murder. They rightly were found guilty. But we would not have known any of that had it not gone to trial. And we cannot trust people to make those judgments before evidence is brought up. All the evidence is brought up. Because not everybody knows everything. And people have biases. I agree. This is something I agree. I see, Nan. I agree. Citizens' arrest should not be legal. They are, though. They're also legal. They are also legal in New York. And this could have been a situation where Penny thought he was making a citizen's arrest and protecting others. But from yelling of an erratic man, choking him out for what witnesses are saying right now was roughly 15 minutes. I don't play that. That's not self-defense. That's not even defense of others. That's why my bar for what self-defense is needs to be higher than what a lot of people's are. because you can't know if you're going to end up, one, killing somebody engaged in this. The chokehold is designed to kill a person if you don't do it correctly. You hold it as long as Penny did on Neely, that person is dying. Period. That's what happens. That's why it happened. That's why he died. He had not enough oxygen going to the brain because he was being air choked. That's why he was still doing death rattles instead of just limp, because his body was gasping for air that it couldn't get. That's why I think that he should have been charged. And why I actually kind of trusted that the New York DA would charge him. I don't hold anybody at fault for the protest or anything like that, because they couldn't know that charge was going to happen. And it's important to make your voice heard and do these things, especially when in the face of an injustice. And when a man dies, that is an injustice. When a man dies for yelling, essentially, even though they were threats. From what we know right now, they were threats. There were threats of physical violence. Okay? But when a person dies because of those threats of physical violence, prior to them engaged in any physical violence themselves, we have an injustice. We can talk about the systemic injustices that Neely faced for being homeless, for being mentally ill, for being poor, for being black. But in this moment, those things don't matter to the affirmative defense that Penny is going to have to make in this trial. And that is what we're talking about right here, right now. And that is what Republicans are actually focused on too. And we'll get into that. But I want to get to some of these comments here, because I see a lot of comments from y'all, and I just wanted to riff there for a minute to make sure I got all that out before getting into it. But Mr. B99 says, we are a well-regulated militia. I disagree. We're not well-regulated at all right now, which is why we're having some of these problems, which is why there was just these past 2 weeks, there was 3 or 4 people killed in somebody else's yard or driveway, kids, a person turning around, a teen knocking on a door, etc. Oh, I thought I did answer that. Okay, so Icenian, let me restate this, because I think this is important, especially for the stuff that we're about to get into. So the reason why I think someone should be charged for someone's death, even in self-defense, is because we can't know if it was actually self-defense without all the evidence coming out of it. I think it's more than an investigation, though. Because of the standards of reasonable self-defense that are there, we have to have a system in place where people judge whether or not that person's actions should or should not be considered reasonable. With Neely's death specifically, we have a man engaged in what he claims to be self-defense of others due to Neely making erratic violent threats, basic generalized violent threats. But is it reasonable to choke a man for those threats for a roughly 15 minutes? I say no. There's going to be people that will say yes. The only way to come to a conclusion in a system of procedural justice, which is what we have, you need to have that go through the courts. You can't rely on somebody else's interpretation of it, or at least one other person's interpretation, whether it be the police, the DA. You can't necessarily rely on that, because there might be evidence, exculpatory evidence, even for the person that did the defense, that comes out later. And there's people that have tons of biases, which we'll get into about these things, because that's why people brings up his criminal history and his mental illness for saying, well, of course they felt threatened. Look at what he did. None of the stuff he did in the past was known in that moment either. So is it really reasonable to be like, hey, let's choke this man out for 15 minutes? I'm going to say no. And that to make that determination in a court of law is the system that we have, and it's the kind of the best one that we've come up with as a species. At least in my opinion it is. And that's why we have to have them charged. beyond a reasonable doubt, if it's reasonable, for their affirmative self-defense, because no one disagrees that this act was what killed him. So hopefully that makes sense to you now and it makes it clear. Now, here comes some of my other political opinions coming out on this now, because this is important as well. All of this is important to point out specifically because of what right-wingers are doing with this case. They are saying, and this is objectively true, that Neely deserved to be killed. Not only that, they are saying that our demands for justice are evil. We get no clearer calls for that than what we've seen from Tim Pool in his debate with Lance of the Serfs in the following clip, which we'll go over to now. We're going to play it for roughly a minute, okay? Because that's where this gets done. And then we can talk about why that is the case.
And get the police down there. And then he ended up dying, which has resulted in the left, like AOC, whether or not people were, I don't know if you consider her left, but AOC.
Yeah, she's progressive.
She said this was a public murder. And now you've got protesters calling for this guy to be arrested. They're saying he committed a murder. And I think this is actually...
To be clear, this video was published on, it was 8 days ago, so it was published on May 5th. So just to give some additional context, this is Tim Pool suggesting that we are going to see him charged because of people protesting, just to be clear.
Actually a really good example of what is described as anarcho tyranny, in that you had 25 people pushed onto subway tracks in the past year. You've had like a woman get raped on a train in Philadelphia, and we don't hear
these cases he's talking about are true, but do they matter to this specific case? No. They don't matter in this specific case. And I'll get into why they're bringing this up now, though. But we'll let it play for another 20 seconds.
Hear a single peep from any of these politicians, from any of these activists, until someone actually stops the guy. If you go back 7 years...
Kills him, right? Kills him. He killed him.
Sure.
Yeah.
So when someone is being violent and then someone else acts in self-defense of others and the person dies in the process, now there's all of a sudden calls for, okay, so this guy should be criminally charged, but there was no call for...
Yes, he should be criminally charged. And we're going to get into why. Well, we got into why. We're going to get into why he's bringing this up. People like Tim Pool are trying to turn Penny into another Barney Getz. They want this to be a referendum on crime and self-defense, and they want the jury to rule in the same way that they ruled for Barney Getz. For people that do not know the story of Barney Getz, I'll give a brief summary of that. So on December 22nd, 1984, Bernard Getz shot 4 young black men on a New York subway train in Manhattan after they allegedly tried to rob him. All 4 teenagers survived, although Daryl Kebby was paralyzed and suffered brain damage as a result of his injuries. A jury subsequently found Getz guilty of 1 count of carrying an unlicensed firearm and acquitted him of the remaining charges. For the firearm offense, he served 8 months of a 1-year sentence. The jury had the same opinions of that case that Tim Pool has for this. The jury thought, man, we had rampant crime in the 80s. Everything was just out of control. We had these massive people coming around, and we had, what was it, the guardian angel groups coming in and setting up like protection gangs because the police weren't able to come to do it. And just like a man somebody attempted to rob this man, and he just couldn't take it anymore, and he defended his life rightly. Right? That's what Tim Pool is saying about Jordan Neely. He's thinking it's reasonable for a man that yells and makes a generalized violent threat, experiencing a mental health episode, which is what I believe is going on with him. What's going on with him? Believes that that person that detained him, that Penny detained him, and ultimately killed him, was just doing the right thing. All across social media, you see Republicans, conservatives, some libertarians, all making the same argument, that this was self-defense and that we should not be taking it anymore. We should be able to defend ourselves even from these useless words, because that's what they were, useless words. You said it good, I see. You said it good. Someone yelling and making threats is a call for police intervention, not a citizen. But that's not what the Republicans, people like Tim Pool, libertarians, whatever ideological spectrum these people hold, that is not what they believe. They believe that you should be able to defend yourself and take it into your own hands, because the police are not always going to be able to get there in time, and it's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. But at the same time, they don't want them to be judged by 12. They don't want him charged with murder, because they don't believe that it was murder. Now, I am not making a direct comparison between Bernard Goetz and Daniel Penny. From all looks of it, they are not at all similar in composure or even like thinking about this. But it's important to bring him up to explain where people are on the political spectrum that thinks that Neely deserved to die. The following clip is from the Confessions of Bernard Goetz interview with police that sparked the debate about the limits of self-defense, gun law, and morality. We are experiencing a similar situation now with Jordan Neely, or at least the attempt to make it similar. So it is important to listen to what he says here, because it is a similar mentality.
The moral issue, what is right and wrong, there are moral issues. You decide. I became a vicious animal, and if you think that is so terrible, I just wish anyone could have been there in my place. So anyone who's going to pass judgment, fine. I was vicious. My intent was to kill him. And you just decide what's right and wrong.
So unlike Republicans right now, even Benny Goetz was saying that he should have been charged. That's why he ultimately turned himself in. But they don't want that to happen, because they don't believe that Neely deserved to live, because Neely was a former criminal, because Neely was mentally unwell, because Neely committed violence against people, because Neely was homeless. And I'm assuming that some of it is racial animus as well. I don't know Tim Pool's opinion on that, but I've seen enough tweets online to understand that some of this, or post online, not just tweets, that some of this is driven by racial animus, by a desire to regain control of the situation. And we shouldn't stand for it. Tim Pool liked to call AOC evil for her demand for justice in the killing of Jordan Neely. Meanwhile, Tim Pool is not only calling people evil, but calling Daniel Penny a hero. He is saying that we need to do more of this, that people should stand up and take back their streets, their rights, or what have you. He is implicitly advocating for anarchy, for biased individuals to take the law into their own hands and enact quote-unquote justice in the name of safety. I thought that's not something we did in America, the United States. I thought that's not something we did that we're not supposed to do in our system of justice. And for people to say that we should do that, to promote the anarchy that they are accusing people like me of promoting, that is projection. And that is evil. Full stop.